Thanks for tuning in with FM Students. For more information, visit us at fmstudents.com.
Beautiful. So good to see all of you here tonight. If you will, on your way back to your seat, go ahead and give somebody a high five around you. Go ahead, left and right, give them a high five. Say, hey, it's great to see you here tonight. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Hey, it is really great to be with you guys tonight. Thank you for showing up and showing out each and every Wednesday. Hey, tonight we're going to continue our conversation on the topic of prayer in our series called Circles. Everybody say circle. And really, here's what we're trying to do. Like last week and this week, we've been trying to adopt the value of prayer in our everyday lives. Because one of the things we said last week was that prayer is one of those things that we know as Christians, that we know as believers in Jesus that we're supposed to do, right? Like prayer is a conversation with God. And so we understand as Christians, it's one of the very first things that we ever really quite understand when we become a Christian is we're supposed to pray. But we don't quite understand or comprehend, nor does really anybody, I think, fully understand until the day we meet Jesus face to face, the value and the power of prayer in our everyday lives. So last week, we talked specifically about what it looked like to pray for our hurting world. And we really continued the conversation last week off of See You at the Pole. Some of you guys were with us last week, last Wednesday morning on your campus, praying for your school, your peers, your administrators, teachers, nation, government, so on and so forth. And so last week we talked specifically about our world, how we need to be praying for our world regularly, on the daily, if that makes any sense to anyone here tonight. Now, one thing that we did unanimously agree last week was that if we want to see a different world, then we must begin praying for a different world. In other words, we said that if we want to see a world that no longer struggles with addictions like alcoholism or heroin or weed, if we want to see a nation, if we want to see a world that no longer struggles with pornography, if we want to see a world, right, that no longer struggles with judgment and criticism and pride and jealousy, if we want to see a different world, if we want to live in a different world, we first had to begin praying for a different world. Now this week we're going to take a little bit of a different lens, a different filter, if you will, and we're going to talk about praying circles around our people, our problems, and our passions. I'm going to say that again. We're tonight discussing what it means to pray circles around our people, our problems, and our passions. So if you have your Bible or your phone, turn to Joshua chapter 6, Old Testament, Joshua chapter 6, and here's what kind of has taken place thus far in the Bible up to Joshua chapter 6. The nation of Israel, which were God's people, were being led by this guy named Moses, all right? And Moses was one of the patriarchs of faith. Like when you look in the Bible at biblical leadership, when you look in the Bible for somebody who loved God with all of his heart, you will find most likely at the top of the list, besides Jesus, Moses. Moses was an incredible guy, and so he was leading God's people. And he had had so many conversations with God in prayer that God had uttered or spoken multiple promises to Moses about what was to come for God's people, what was to come ultimately for the nation of Israel. So Moses is leading this nation. He's leading them to what he believes to be the promised land, because God promised them that there would be this land that they would overtake, that they would overcome, and ultimately live in. It was a beautiful place. It was a perfect place in a lot of ways. And so he's leading them his entire reign to the promised land. But what happens next was kind of a shock. Everybody say, what happens? He dies. I know, I kind of set you guys up for that, didn't I? It's kind of disappointing. He gets all the way up to where he believes he's leading people into the promises of God. They're praying over it daily, and he dies. But here's what happened before he died. Before he died, he was mentoring this guy named Joshua. And Joshua was a young guy, a lot like some of you in here tonight. He was a young guy, had a lot of potential, and he had been mentored. Meaning he had been developed by this guy named Moses. He had been being taught by, he had been following in the footsteps of this guy named Moses. So he had some pretty good ideas of what biblical leadership looked like. And so before Moses dies, he actually hands off the reign and authority of God's people to this guy named Joshua. Moses exits the scene. He exits the story. And we move into now the reign of Joshua. Now, Joshua, you could imagine, is trying to fill some pretty big shoes, right? I mean, God's given all these promises, and certainly he wants to fulfill them, but he's not really sure how. Like, it's chaotic, it's confusing. Their leader, their patriarch leader's dead, and God has all these promises that have yet to come to be, and now Joshua's leading, and he's young, and people, it's just confusing. It's chaos. So Joshua knows, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. So Joshua chapter 6 is what Joshua does, and that's what we're going to read tonight. Now let me ask you before we go any further, though, how many of you hate to have promises made that are never kept? Anybody? Yeah, we all hate that, right? It's just one of the worst. It feels like you've been stabbed, but you not only got stabbed, like you got stabbed with like a sword that was like 6 foot long, and it's heated up in the fire before they stab you, and then they turn it, and right, that's what it feels like to have promises made that are never actually come to be. And so that's kind of what the people of Israel, that's what they kind of feel like, is God's supposed to do all of these things, but yet he hasn't. It's been decades, it's been even a century or so that God's been promising some of these things, and yet they have never come to be. The people are saying, we've prayed for it, you've promised us, where is it? So that's what Joshua comes into. But then in Joshua chapter 6, he takes action. And this is what we want to read tonight. Joshua chapter 6, verse 1 through 5. It says, now Jericho was strongly fortified because of the Israelites. Jericho, keep in mind, is the promised land. That's what God has promised would be theirs one day. It says, no one was leaving or entering, speaking of Jericho. And the Lord said to Joshua, look, I have handed Jericho, its king, and its soldiers over to you. March around the city with all the men of war, circling the city one time, and do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 rams, horns, trumpets, and in the front of the ark. But on the 7th day, march around the city 7 different times. It says, and then it goes on to say that, and while they blow the trumpets on the 7th day, and at that moment when there is prolonged blast of the horn, and you hear it sound, have all of the troops give a mighty shout, and then the city wall will collapse. So in other words, Joshua says, God, you've made these promises. You've made us this goal. You've promised us that this place would be ours, yet we can't get in. In fact, not only can we not get in, nobody can get out. It's just a fortified, locked up city. How do you expect us to get in there? And God says, here's what you're going to do. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds out of this world. But you're going to walk around it and you're going to pray that the walls would fall. Now, how many of you in here have ever seen a wall fall without anything else touching it? Doesn't happen, right? Like, nearly impossible. And so God's like, hey, for 6 days, send your people out. March around in circles. So on every day, you're going to march around one big circle, go home. Come back the next day, march around one big circle. Do that for 6 days. On the 7th day, you're going to show up bright and early, and you're going to go around 7 different times. On the 7th time, they're going to blow the horns. You're going to shout at the top of your lungs, and the walls are going to fall down. Could you imagine God's people when Joshua goes back to his nation and says, here's what we're going to do, people. I've got a plan. And they're waiting for this beautifully executed visionary plan. And he says, we're going to pray, and the walls are going to fall. Can you imagine the people saying, that's never going to work. That's never going to work. Hit the pause button, fast forward. Here's what happens. Continuing in verse 15 and 7 through 17. Early on the 7th day, they started at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same way. That was the only day they marched around the city 7 times. And after the 7th time, the priests blew the trumpets, and Joshua said to the troops, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Shout, but the Lord has given you the city. And the people were thinking, all we did was walk around in circles and ask God to let the walls fall. But then watch what happens in verse 20. So the troops shouted, and the trumpet sounded. And when they heard the blast of the trumpet, the troops gave them a great shout, and the walls collapsed. Let me say that again. The walls collapsed. And they took the city. See, students, I think all of us tonight have something we got to pray for. In fact, by show of hands tonight, how many of y'all got something you got to pray for right now? Big, little, right? There's no prayer too small. There's no prayer too big. We've all got some things to pray for. Maybe it's health. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's a trying circumstance. Maybe it's exam, a test, athletics, a game. I don't know what it is for you. We've all got different things we got to pray for, but we all got something to pray for. There's been a lot of things in Alexis and I's life that have been trying and certainly needed to be circled in prayer. I'll give you a few examples. First, coming here, right? Because for several years, we knew that God was calling us somewhere different to minister. And for about 3 years, a 3-year time, we prayed for you all sitting in this room tonight. We prayed specifically for a church that we could minister to a group of students like you. We prayed for 2 weeks. We prayed for a month. We prayed for 3 months. We prayed for 6 months. We prayed for almost 3 years, students, before God opened this door for us to be here with you tonight. But here it gets even crazier. When we got here, we needed a place to live, right? So we move into the apartments up by Montgomery High School. We're there for a few months. We love it there, but it's not ideal. We got kids, we got a dog, third floor, just crazy. It just wasn't right for us. So my wife has this beautiful plan. She says, we're a lot like Joshua. She comes to me, she's like, we need to pray for a house. I said, well, I thought we had been praying for a house. She goes, no. We don't need to just pray for a house. We need to pray that God will give us a house. I'm like, give us a house? What are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. So we start praying that God would give us a house. 2 weeks go by. Nothing happens. 3 weeks go by. Nothing happens. 4 weeks, a month now goes by. Nothing happens. Then one weekend, somebody right out in this atrium walks up to me and says, hey, we have a house that we're not living in anymore. Do you want to live in it? And it's a beautiful house. It's perfect for our family. Exactly what we were looking for. What if we would have stopped praying after week 2? What if we would have stopped praying after week 3? Gets crazier, right? Watch this. A month ago, we're talking about this new baby that's coming in January, a little girl. Her name's going to be Mackenzie. We're going to call her Kinsey for short. It's going to be amazing. My little princess, spoiled, the whole 9 yards. She's going to have it all. She's already got a Barbie doll, and she's not even here yet. And so we said, well, 3 kids isn't going to fit in our car. It's just not going to work. We need to get an SUV, another SUV, third row, everybody to fit in there. Okay, so we go to the dealership. Different dealerships. We're looking around. What cars are we looking for? What's going to be best for us? Of course, you're looking at them, and you're automatically, just drawn to the ones that are like, $130,000, and you want to drive. You know you're not going to buy it, but you want to drive it, so you drive it and whatever. So finally, we find the couple that we like that fit what we're looking for. Still a little pricey for what I want to pay, so we start talking. And while the salesman is out talking numbers, my wife says something to me that I've only heard a few times in my life. She said, we need to pray that God will give us a car. And I told her I thought she was crazy. Nobody's going to give us a car. God already gave us a house. We really want to expect him to give us a car? We left the dealership. We prayed. We prayed for about 3 weeks. Someone walks up to us in this atrium, same exact place as the house. They said, hey, can you pray for us? We're getting a new car soon, and we have another car we really need to get rid of. We said, yeah, what kind of car is it? I'm kind of intrigued. They started explaining it's a third row SUV, everything we were looking for. Everything. So the next day, I'm like, okay, let's talk a little bit more. How much do you want for this car? And I get this text back, and it says, we're not selling the car. I said, whoa, wait a minute. Yesterday, you guys just said that you were trying to get rid of this car. And he texts back, he goes, yeah, we are, but we're not selling it. I'm like, I don't understand. I was failing to recognize God in this moment, right? He texts me back these words. We're not selling the car. We're just looking for someone to give it to. God gave us a car. He gave us a stinking car and a house and a ministry with you guys. With all that said, what if we would have stopped praying for it? See, the nation of Israel, they had something that they had to pray for. They had a feat in front of them that was much greater than themselves. And God said, you know how you're going to accomplish it? You know how I'm going to answer your prayers? It's if you keep praying. That's why he said, I want you to pray for 6 days, and I want you to circle around that thing once a day for 6 days. And on the 7th day, you're going to do it 7 different times. What if students, they would have stopped on day 2? What if they would have stopped on day 4? Would the walls have ever fallen? So I want you to write these 3 things down tonight about prayer, kind of what we learned from Joshua's story. Number 1, even the most difficult thing we face is no match for prayer. There is nothing too great for you not to pray for, no matter how big, no matter how small. Number 2, I want you to write this down. Prayer is a lifestyle that never ends. And number 3, answers to prayers are always on time, even when it's not in our time. I want you to note this tonight, that prayer requests are always heard, sometimes unanswered, but a lot of times are on hold because we stopped praying for them. Matthew chapter 7, we're almost done. It says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. What if students, they stopped praying on day 2? What if on day 2 they saw no progress? And they said, never mind, day 3, I'm staying in bed. What if they woke up on day 5? They had pushed through to day 5. What if they got to day 5 and it was raining, and they were like, nah, I think I'll skip out today. What if they got to day 7 and they only marched around twice instead of 7 times? They were this close to their prayer being answered. They were this close to a miracle taking place in their life. But they stopped short. Jonathan's going to come up. He's going to be patting some music behind us, but I think we've all got something to pray for. I think we all got some things in our life, big and small, that need to be prayed for. And I think someone in this place tonight, myself included, and also our junior high group that was in here earlier, I think there's some people that have been praying for some things for quite some time that we're ready to give up on because they're not happening. But tonight I want to encourage you, I want to inspire you, I want to challenge you. Don't give up. Don't give up.